Beautiful folks, what is up and how are you doing? This is Valentine the Plug, straight from the Danger Room, and I'm happy to see y'all back with me for another video. In this video, I'm gonna put you onto a couple of tips that's gonna help you up your R&B sample game, and for that, we're using a beat that samples "Stay" by Pretty Ricky. Yay! So the first tip that I want to give y'all even before we head into FL Studio is learn the stylistic differences of R&B throughout the decades. You don't gotta delve into the way it's evolved, not entirely, but you gotta know what defines R&B in those decades. Because you know 90s R&B is sounding fundamentally different from the more sample based, the more soul sample based, the more hip hop infused R&B of the early 2000s. It's gonna sound fundamentally different from that weird EDM shit that we were doing in the early 2000s, and it sounds fundamentally different from what we are doing right now. And that's also going to help determine your preference, because if you know what to look for in each decade, you'll develop an own style, an own preference, and of course, you know, you might flock to certain types of samples a bit more. So go and delve into that and develop your preference. Alright, welcome back into FL Studio, beautiful folks, and the second tip that I want to give y'all is set up a processing chain for yourself. I'm starting off with neutron freeze EQ, big cuts, of course, high pass, low pass, a little bit of mid frequencies. I'm compressing the remaining mid frequencies with my multi-band compressor. I've got chorus on this, of course. I've got phases on this, of course. I've got shaper box playing with the volume and the pan, and I've got spaced out to give me a custom super wet and trippy reverb. Now the reason why a processing chain is important is because it saves time. It saves you time trying to get your specific sound going on. I know from experience that I am a big fan of that filtered out Bryson Tiller, Tory Lanez, OVO kind of sound, and this helps me set that up immediately. It generally saves time, and it immediately allows me to go on to the next stage, which is basically just figure out ideas. So figure out what processing chain works for you, set it up, right click on the mixer trap, go to file, go to mix, save mixer state as, give it a title, and you're good to go. And of course, you know, feel free to take whatever I'm using, which is an EQ, a multi-band compressor, chorus, a phaser, shaper box, and a custom reverb or delay FX plugin, and experiment it and see how it works for you. Alright, beautiful folks, let's actually get into the sample. You can see I got this big brick waveform right here, which kind of emphasizes my point that you need a processing chain in order to be able to deal with this kind of shit. You know, it helps it sit your sample down and mix better. But this is actually about tip number 3, me telling y'all that you need to identify which kind of gems you can find in the intro of your song, your verse, your hook, your bridge, your pre-chorus, and that kind of stuff. And it goes even deeper, because R&B singers, they tend to decorate, they tend to sprinkle and season their song with riffs and runs all throughout the song. So your third hook might not have the cool impact or the climax that the first hook has, since it's really just building up. So you really got to be very attentive and deliberate about which parts you sample, which parts you listen to, and which parts convey what you seek for in a sample. Because the first, you know, hook, it may not be all that, but the second hook with basically Cisco, for example, singing his entire goddamn heart out, now that might be the part that you need for a beat. And I also want to add, please don't make the mistake of skipping the song once you find there's nothing in the intro, which actually brings me to tip number 4, learn to love the vocals and the instrument, because that's what makes an R&B sample. Honestly, please do not skip the intro and pretend like we do not have 2 decades of sampling soul with the high-pitched vocals behind us, because that's some historic revisionist bullshit. Please love the vocals in your samples, please. Like tip number 5, beautiful folks, I see a lot of y'all cats do this, and I honestly don't blame y'all. If y'all do this, what you essentially did is you chopped up a song. I'm gonna show y'all how to chop up a sample. let me try and explain what I can to the best of my ability given the limitations of my English. So I divide my grid, my 16 pad grid, into vertical rows like this, vertical rows, and horizontal lines like this. Okay, so we know that. Let's take a step back. Let's delve into a little bit of music theory. So sampling essentially, I feel, is the art of arranging the individual chops but still keeping the original chord progression of your sample intact. And I think that Knife Wonder said that if you want to understand sampling, you need to understand chord progression, because no matter how you put it, even if you flip a sample, people are going to be looking for that logical beginning, that logical climax, the logical coming home, and then the logical cycling back to the beginning. So back to the way I view this. So I know that this essentially is a chord progression. I know that these two lines are a full chord progression. I know that these two lines are a full chord progression. They're essentially a musical phrase. So let's say that a note is a letter, then a chord, which letters are constructed of letters, are words, and a musical phrase is basically a sentence. So this is a sentence, and this is a sentence, and these two sentences belong together. This is a sentence, and this is a sentence. These two belong together, but they're essentially the same sentence, and that allows all kind of cool stuff like this. So what I did, I used my knowledge of chord progressions and the fact that I know that this is that these two are full chord progressions and these two. This allows me to use this line and this line interchangeably. I can combine this line with this line. I can combine this line with this line. I essentially substitute this line with this line, and I can play parts of this line and combine it with parts of this line, and that's how you really get into the nitty-gritty of chopping, and that's how your sampling becomes a lot less going through the motions and a lot more expressive. Now allow me to say this: taking a part of a song and looping it, and taking a part of a song, chopping it up, and then arranging the chops in order, both of it constitutes as sampling. But if I had to ask you which one you think is more expressive, then I think we have an obvious answer. But let's head on to tip number 6, and that's, please y'all, start adding harmonic elements to your beats. Start adding chord progressions, for example. And I know that this is kind of a tricky thing because not everybody has either the hearing or the music theoretical knowledge to really start adding chord progressions, but they do, especially if you're working with a heavily filtered out sample, make your beat sound a lot more full and a lot more expressive. And I want to give y'all a quick example of the cool stuff, because here I actually have a chord progression where I'm playing a couple of grace notes and licks here on top, and they sound amazing. Let me just demo it to y'all. Now, your biggest question right now might be, how do I find the key of a sample? And honestly, you can use Edison, of course, to detect the pitch regions. There's tons of third-party VSTs, some of them free, some of them paid, which allow you to find the key of a sample. I mostly use my hearing. It does cost me a lot of time, but I do consider it a form of training, if I can identify the chord movements. And if you're a little bit into chord theory, you know how to recognize chord music, chord movements, then you're gonna be getting very far, because a lot of R&B songs use either 6-5-1 chord progressions with a dominant 5. They either use 1-4-5 chord progressions, sometimes with a 6, sometimes with a diminished chord at the end. It's not to say that R&B chords can be complex, but 9 out of 10 times they are not too complex. Okay, so another tip that I want to give y'all is put your fucking drums in the front. Honestly, I can't believe that there's still beats out there that don't have the beat in the front. And that's more of a stylistic thing because, you know, if you're making trap soul kind of beats, chicks tape kind of beats, the sample is so heavily filtered that it automatically pushes the drums, which are by nature a lot more brighter, of course, to the front. If you want to make your drums stand out a little bit more, send your kick, your 808, your hi-hat, and the snare, your perks to a drum bus. Add a wee bit of drum bus compression just so they can stand out more by virtue of just being tighter and a lot more punchier. You can also add a lot more warmth, say by sketch cassette, or by another tape plugin, add a little bit of grit to it so it stands out just a little bit more. And then there's the last tip that I can give you, and that is where to find R&B samples. And this is kind of where it gets difficult. Crate digging doesn't require you to love R&B, but it does require you to love music and to understand the genre that you're trying to sample. So honestly, if you really want to get an idea of R&B, you know, go find some playlists. You know, you can do a real pragmatic approach and just sample whatever sounds good. But it's a lot more easier if you like it. And that brings me back to the beginning. Learn the stylistic differences of R&B in each decade to determine your preferences, to determine the processing chain that you're going to set up, to learn which chord movements are used, to learn how to deliberately chop your samples and what you're looking for in the samples. It all comes full circle. So with that being said, beautiful people, I hope that you enjoyed this pretty extensive breakdown of how to sample 90s R&B, and I probably won't be doing any feature how to sample R&B. I'm just going to be cooking up R&B. You can always refer to this video if there's anything you want to know, but if you have a question, of course, drop it in the comments and I'm happy to help. Y'all be easy, beautiful folks. I'm going to see y'all in the next video. Peace.